I'm always looking for the solution versus staying in the problem. And so that's always been my outlook on life.
What if you turn hardship into greatness, anger into serenity? Everything changes. Make your life a masterpiece. Welcome, I'm Yannick, your host, and now joining me, the author of The Trusted Teacher, published by Solution Tree, Erica Battle. Erica Battle, welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to finally have you and discuss your newly published book.
Thank you so much.
To start with, who is Erica Battle in simply one sentence?
In one sentence, Erica Battle is a passionate educator.
Wonderful. So now, what made you write the book in the first place? The Trusted Educator.
So, I'm a second career teacher, and I was not traditionally trained. Education was not my career choice. I wanted to be a broadcast journalist, and I began to substitute teach, and I fell in love with a group of seventh graders who, if you are an educator, seventh grade. But I fell in love with a group of seventh grade students that where our relationship started off really rocky in the beginning. And then it leveled out, and they became some of my favorite students. I still talk to quite a few of them today, as a matter of fact. And when I started writing this book for Solution Tree and we started reading the manuscript, we realized that my students really trusted me, and that is what really changed our relationship. Is I really created a foundation of trust with that group of students. And the trusted teacher is outlining how was able to develop that type of trust with those students.
Let's unpack this. What do we mean by trust? So, explain to us what really trust is and then how to actually build it within a classroom.
That's a good question. So, trust is when students or people in general really believe you are who you say you are. It's how you show up each and every day. And that is consistent. So, it really is me really not even saying, but through my actions, allowing my students to believe I am who I say I am. And honestly, you develop trust by everyday interactions with your students, their classmates, and your colleagues, because our students are watching us, and they're not just watching us inside of our classroom. They watch us when we're outside having conversations with our teammates, listening to what we say. They're watching how we interact with their peers. They're watching to see if we are fair with our discipline practices. They watch us to see if we follow through with what we say. And so trust is really built when we show up the way that we say we are each and every day, then our students can trust us and take us at our word.
From where did you get this ability of making people trust you? You really seem, and you really mention in the book very important features that you actually need. But where do you think, or who really helped you to build this trust towards students, but then also to people, because that's really what comes through when I talk with you. You seem to be a very trustworthy person.
Well, thank you. I try to show up as my authentic self. And when it comes to students, honestly, I did not have a good experience from seventh grade to high school. I did not I I did not trust my teachers. I didn't feel like I was seen. I didn't feel like I was valued. I didn't feel like I was heard in my school career. And so when I became a teacher, I didn't want my students to feel the way I felt as a student. I wanted my students to understand and recognize that, hey, this teacher right here, she's really here to support you. Whether it doesn't matter if I have to discipline you today, tomorrow, if you have a problem, I'm still going to be here to help you solve that problem. And so, what I learned being a student was I didn't like the way I felt in my classroom, and I didn't want my students to feel the same way I felt. So, I knew that I had to approach the relationships that I cultivated with my students totally different.
So you really incorporate this and learn this through observation. So it's actually very powerful, and through reflection, reflecting really about your personal experience, and then watching teachers, and that's a really unique skills actually to have this in, especially when you are young. So what do you think was it that you were not able to trust certain teachers?
Well, growing up in middle school, I had some family dynamic shift. And I'm not saying I was a perfect angel because I probably was not. But at the same time, even when my grades started to go down, my behavior started to change. I started to isolate. None of my teachers inquired or, kind of dug deep into, well, how did you go from a A student to now a C or D student? What's going on with your behavior? You were never like this. So what's going on? And so what I recognized is I wanted one of my teachers to take a moment and ask me what was going on, and not just make an assumption of my behavior based off of, daily interactions. I really needed someone to say, hey, what's going on? How can I help? So, when I became a teacher, I made sure that I was that person that my students could come to, even if they only had me one period a day, it didn't matter. I would wanted to be that teacher that my students felt like they could trust, and that if they had any problems, that I would be a resource to help them problem solve.
So, what did you specifically do in order to build this relationship with your seventh graders?
Well, number one, I'm authentic. So I show up as myself every day. I show up imperfect because I'm not perfect, and I allow my students to see my imperfections. Number two, I was very structured. So my classroom was very structured. And I think, sometimes we forget that our middle and our high school students need structure and consistency in order to have a safe environment. A lot of our students come from chaotic neighborhoods, chaotic home environments, and the last thing they need is a chaotic classroom. And so I was very structured, and my students knew what it took to be successful in my classroom. There were no guessing games. I had procedures for everything. But I was also consistent on how I treated my students as well. You know, from my favorite student to, the student that could be absent a few days a week. If something happened, I had to be fair with discipline, and my students saw that. They recognized that I didn't treat one student one way when they hadn't broke a rule, or made an infraction, or treat another student another way. If If it was an infraction and a consequence was warranted, it really didn't matter. I had to give that consequence, even if it hurt my heart, but I had to give that consequence. And also, believe it or not, our students try us to see if we'll stand by our word. So if I told my students, hey, if you do that one more time, I'm calling your mom. If they did it, I stopped what I was doing and I got on that phone. If I gave them a warning and said, the next time you do this, here is that consequence, I stopped and gave them that consequence because I needed them to take me at my word that if it comes out of Miss Battle's mouth, that is what she means. And so that was very important for especially that age group of students, middle and high school students, because they do begin to test you. They test boundaries. They do things to see if you'll follow through or if you'll get too busy. And so, even though these things are in my book, one of the biggest things was just being authentic, being who I was each and every day. That was very important to that age group.
Even you say, there are, of course, different challenges that the young teenagers, face. And yet, I think to anyone, structure is so important because it's not just in the classroom or in the neighborhood, but it's really the social world, social media, that is so chaotic in so many ways.
Yeah.
And so to give and to provide a certain structure, a certain security, to young adults, I think it's so important. When did you realize that structure is actually one of the most important things that I can actually implement?
So early on in my teaching career, actually, my principal sent me to a classroom management professional development. And it was like an aha moment, like early in my career. It was like, oh my goodness. Again, I came as a substitute teacher, so I was not traditionally trained. I didn't have that skill set. So when my principal sent me to this professional development on classroom management, the professional development really focused around structure, procedures, routines, and consistency. And it was like a light bulb went off. And so I went to that course for 3 years, right? I didn't just go to it once, I went to it two more times to make sure that even though I had implemented some of the principles, I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. And so each year I got better and better to finally my classroom ran like a well-oiled machine. My kids could run that classroom because they knew what happened Monday through Friday. They knew the structure. They knew what happened when the bell rang. You know, they knew how to turn in their classwork. They knew, from day to day, from moment to moment, how Miss Battle ran her classroom. And so once I learned those principles, it was nothing that you could do to tell me they didn't work because I worked with students who traditionally some would consider high risk, behaviorally challenged, students in lower performance schools. But my students, they performed well, they had great behavior in my classroom, and they were able to meet my expectation because I gave them everything they needed to be successful. Yes, I had an expectation for them to learn and to do their work. Well, my classroom was set up in a way so they could be successful. And so it's nothing anyone can tell me to this day that does not, proper procedures and routines and consistency and structure inside of a classroom can change the entire dynamic.
And I love the fact that you actually went 3 times to the same seminar over the day. I think that's for all these seminars basically necessary, right?
Yeah.
If you just, because usually you can just really start implementing a couple of things, right? And you just build on that because there's so many variables, right, that you have to somehow manage, right? And so going consistently back and forth, you can reflect and adjust and then reiterate. So that's a wonderful way of doing it. It's like basically instead of always reading new books, right, but really starting implementing one book at a time. And this really requires so much work. It really it's basically almost like a year at least engagement really with just one book in
Yeah.
order to really absorb and really become, the knowledge actually that you read and absorb, right? It's one thing having knowing it conceptually, but it's really different actually applying it on a day-to-day basis. So what I really see, and you wonderfully describe this also in the book, you're really intentional. Have you always been that intentional in your life?
You know what? Yeah, I am, because things can happen by happenstance, but if you really want to get results, you have to plan for those results. And that even includes success in the classroom. You have to intentionally plan to be successful. You have to intentionally plan to foster an environment where the foundation is trust. You can't leave those things to chance, because if you do, there is a chance that it won't happen if we're not intentionally planning for them to happen.
So how do you plan intentionally? Give us one example of what you think like is the backbone or has been at least the backbone of your very successful practice.
Well, one of the things that I am very intentional with is just getting to know my students. I'm very intentional on getting to know them beyond just being in my classroom, whether it is small talk, noticing, their habits, taking an opportunity to eat. So I would eat lunch with groups of students. I used to teach back in the day when, transparency and overhead. So I would tell stories about myself to my students. And what that did was that allowed my students to open up, that allowed them to feel safe enough to share certain things about them. And so I'm relational anyway. So just by nature, I love relationships. And so I was very intentional in getting to know my students. It's funny that my students would come to school and I would say good morning. And I guess they were not used to people telling them good morning, because they would just keep walking. So I would put my hand out and ask them, "Did you hear me say good morning?" And they would say, "Well, yeah." And I said, "Okay, so the response is good morning, Miss Battle." And it kind of took them by surprise. And I'm like, you can't walk in my classroom unless you say good morning. But then it became very natural for them. I was very intentional with giving my students grace, because they may not have experienced some of the social dynamics that I wanted to engage them in. And so just being very intentional with getting to know my students, being intentional with allowing my students to get to know me, that really was one of the first things that helped really cultivate the relationship. And because that's the first piece of a relationship, getting to know the person that you're in relationship with. And that includes the teacher student relationship as well.
Why do you think this is usually underestimated how important actually is, this building of a really thorough relationship? It's like almost like, seen as given, but it's actually so pivotal, right? If you really want to succeed. So why is that? Why do you think so many struggle with that?
I'll be honest. I really do think that the pandemic, when we had to just be on the computer, kind of really disrupted some of the social skills and social norms that we had when we were face to face. Even though it was just 2 years, we think, oh, it was just 2 years. But what that did was people began to become reclusive. They began to isolate themselves. It was easier to send a message through text versus having a face to face conversation. And I think also the phrase teacher student relationship became such a buzz phrase that people began to discount the importance of that relationship, and it's still very important and pivotal to this day. I was doing a professional development with some teachers who are doing a book study using my book, and one of the things that I had mentioned to the teachers, because a lot of them were new, was relationship is your classroom management. When you have a relationship with middle school and teenage students who are middle school and high school students who are teenagers and beginning to express some independence and test boundaries, the relationship that we have with them really is our classroom management, because they will do things for people that they first of all trust, that they first of all like, right? Or respect. We might not necessarily love each other, but if we have a mutual respect inside of our classrooms, there's not such you know, a power dynamic inside of the classroom. When kids trust you, they're more likely to follow your instructions, to follow your procedures, and to do what you ask them to do inside of the classroom. And so I tell teachers all the time, your relationship with your students is your classroom management.
And it's so true because, what you're actually alluding to is really like building this trust, right? Which is really the foundation of a relationship. Now, no matter what we do, right? Because at least we have to trust that you won't stab me in the back, let's
Yeah.
say, right? And so that's why I think it's so powerful, the book that you wrote. And so, how was it? How was your journey? Was it really this fascination of building a relationship that led you into education? Because it's very different on one hand, and I really can see you as a broadcaster. It's just like typical because you're so energetic, in front of the microphone, the way you communicate it, very intentional. So what was it that really led to this transition, and how has it been? Like, was it like this epiphany? You said like, wow, I found my ultimate calling. How was it? Walk us through.
Well, all right. So I lost a job, and I worked in public relations, loved public relations. Okay. And I lost a job. I was with a smaller firm who was downsizing because of business was slowing down and they couldn't afford my salary, but I still needed to pay some bills. So I started substitute teaching, and I was substitute teaching for a seventh grade classroom where they did not have a teacher at the beginning of the school year. So this class of students, this principal had been looking for a teacher. Well, I was the sixth sub for these students. They had a sub a week because no one would stay. No one would stay with this group of students. Okay. And when I got there, I was there the 1 week, and then I came back the next week. It was like their mission was to get rid of every sub that walked in their door. So I came back the second week. Well, I came back the third week because they still hadn't found a teacher. And the principal actually thought that she had found a teacher. So she had came to me on like a Monday and said, "Hey, I think I found a teacher for this class. Do you mind staying and helping the teacher get acclimated to the class?" And I was like, "Sure, I'll stay. I keep getting paid. That's fine." Well, the teacher never showed up. So the principal was like, "I'm so glad I asked you to stay because the kids wouldn't have had no teacher." So she came to me again later on in the week, like Thursday, and said, "Hey, I think I really found a teacher. They'll start Monday, but will you come back?" And so I said, "Of course, I'll help them. Same thing. I'll help them." Well, Monday comes, I'm there, but the teacher never showed. So again, I was there and she was like, "Whew." So finally, she just said, "Will you stay the year? I'll get you a waiver. I'll get you a permit. And the rest is history." I still was not convinced that I was going to teach. I actually was still looking for a job in public relations. And let's see, maybe the middle of the year, we had, well, towards the end of the school year, we had consultants in our building too. So, which is what I do now. And one of the consultants in my building came to me and said, you really need to think about education as a career. She was like, the way that you were able to turn it around in that classroom and show some gains. Because what I didn't tell you is, even though I was a substitute and I started in October, my students still increased 10% from the previous year in English language arts, right? And I really chalk it up to the relationship that I had with my students, to be able to tell them, like, hey, I don't need seventh grade, but you need seventh grade. And so, we were able to get some learning. They did increase. And this consultant told me that if you don't continue teaching, you'll be doing thousands of kids a disservice if you decide to leave education. And I thought about it, and I don't even know if I was still convinced then. But then I eventually, the next school year, I was able to reconnect with that same principal. She brought me in again because she was moved to another school. She brought me in to her new school, and I got into a master's program, and the rest is history. It's actually, this year would make 20 years that I have been in education. I started in 2005.
Why this it sounds like the perfect journey and perfect fit just for you, because just the ability that you have to communicate and just to inspire people, especially educators, that's a fantastic job. So congratulations
Thank
to
you.
this. What do you think an educator can do in order to really forge and develop these authenticity to what you mentioned also in the book? It's so important if someone just doesn't necessarily have it, because it's daunting. It's not something that everyone is really comfortable with. Not everyone is very comfortable to actually connect with, especially with youth in general.
I think sometimes we forget that we were middle and high school students too. And we forget how hard that age, that time of our life, puberty, pre puberty, high school, trying to, find where we fit as it relates to friend groups, you may be playing sports, and, how awkward that time of our life can be. And I think a lot of times we need to just take a moment and go back and think about how we felt and the things we were going through during that time. And I think that would help us really, really understand and connect with the students that we have in front of us. The behaviors that our students are displaying, a lot of that behavior is not new. But now we have social media, we have camera phones, we have YouTube. So kids are able to record those instances and put it out into the atmosphere in the universe through the lens of social media. So we think that all students act the way of the most scandalous video, when that's not true. A lot of our students are truly looking for someone that they can trust and that they really can find a connection with. So I think one of the first things we can do is just go back and remember what it was like for us during that time of our life, and not really look at our students as this, something that is like unnormal, abnormal, because we too once were middle and high school students as well.
And I think on one hand, we see these huge challenges, right? But on the other hand, it almost seems to me there's also a huge opportunity, because I truly think that especially youth, they're really looking to connect, with someone on a more deeper level. Do you think that is something where also the whole profession is also to some extent shifting? that it becomes even more important to build these relationship in this day and age?
I do, because in the age of social media, our youth have followers, and they don't necessarily have genuine relationships. And they are searching for genuine relationships and connection. And it amazes me, the teachers that really have some of the best behaved classrooms are the teachers that have been able to connect with their students beyond the students being students inside of their classroom. They've been able to connect with them on a more human level, right? More beyond a teacher student relationship, but just as people looking for connection. So a lot of our students, have you ever heard the phrase, um, no, some attention is better than no attention?
I
And
do.
so our students would rather do things that are disruptive, that gets them attention, versus feeling as if no one is paying them any attention. And so think about how things would shift if these same students really felt a connection with the person standing in front of them every day. If we look at it, our kids spend half of the year with us, so they spend half of their childhood in school until they're 18. And wouldn't it be a shame if they went through all of their schooling and felt like there was no one in front of them that they connected with, that they trusted, or that they had a relationship with?
You really nail it, because what you're basically saying is that, any behavior, especially when it comes to student behavior, is really a form of communication, a form
Hmm.
of really, wanting to connect.
Yeah. That it is a form of communication. And a lot of our students, they don't have the vocabulary to say, you know what, I'm feeling frustrated right now. They may say I'm mad, but they're really not mad. They're frustrated, right? Or they're anxious, and they just don't know how to express, you know what, I'm anxious about basketball tryouts. I'm frustrated because I'm not doing well in class right now. I'm frustrated because me and my friends, we're not really getting along, and I don't know what's happening. They don't have those, though. I'm excited because, I'm going out of town next week. And so they don't have a lot of times the vocabulary to be able to express themselves. And so their communication or their behaviors is a manifestation of how they're feeling, but not able to communicate it verbally because they don't necessarily have the vocabulary to be able to express how they're feeling.
How do you personally, on a more personal level, how do you relate and really face challenges?
So, I have kids. I have three sons who are all very different, right? And one of the things that I have recognized is, even though they're all three boys, all three of them need a different version of me and communication in order to in order for me to be able to get my point across, but for us to have a very productive conversation. I learned early on that yelling back and forth, it doesn't solve anything. Even with students, it doesn't solve anything. At some point, someone has to stop, take a breath, and start over. Right. Um, I've also learned to be very clear and concise. This is what I feel. This is what I heard. So that's a really good statement to pick up. This is what I heard. So is that not what you said? Well, this is what I heard. And if that's not what the person meant, it gives them an opportunity to say, but that's not what I meant. So I can say, okay, well, I need you to clarify that, because what I heard was this. And if you don't mean this, what is it that you mean? I try not to. I make try not to have a gray area. I try to be very clear in when I'm communicating, whether it's with adults, whether it's with kids, whether it's with my children, whether it's with my spouse, so that everyone is clear and can understand at least what I'm trying to say, right? And that just kind of helps with communication.
It's such a good point because usually we ourselves we know what we actually want to communicate, right? But there's
Mm-hmm.
another thing to actually make the other person understood, what we actually mean. And so, where did you learn to communicate effectively? Was this something that came more natural to you?
Trial and error. Try really, it was trial and error. And then as you began to as I began to advance in my career through education, the way you communicate with your students is very different than communicating with the adults in the building. And so I really had to, and even now, because I am a consultant, a lot of times I don't have a whole lot of time to get to know the teachers that I'm about to work with, or say I'm about to do a training. Well, and a lot of times these are teachers I am meeting for the very first time. And so one of the things that I try to do is to build relationships quickly. Is as teachers are getting in, I'm walking around the room and I might notice something and say, "Oh, I love your nails. Oh, what you eating for breakfast? Oh, I love that type of coffee." So I do, really quick interactions to get to as many teachers as I can so they feel seen immediately before we even begin. And that gives me the opportunity to build some rapport with these, teachers that I'm about to work with. I also try to be very clear and concise with how I communicate, especially when I'm delivering professional development. So teachers do not leave me wondering, did she mean this or did she mean that? And so I've learned through trial and error that it is very important to be very clear and to be very concise and to communicate in a way that people don't leave you wondering what you said, but more so they understood kind of the message that you were trying to get across. And I
What
was a communications major. So my major was communications in college. I wanted to be a journalist. And so that also helped as well because I was a communications major in college.
Yeah, and I think communication is just so important. I think because we are really human beings, it's all about, as you said, relationships, right? And that's where we really bond and we really find meaning and purpose in our lives. What makes you truly happy if you are?
What makes me true? Now, does it have to be school related?
No, it can be anything,
Okay.
anything.
So, what makes me truly happy is spending time with family. So, I tell people all the time, I love being a mom. Um, Even though my kids are adults, they're grown. But I still love being a mom. Like, my middle son, I make these homemade cinnamon rolls, right? And so my middle son I made some, I guess, last week, as a matter of fact, and he took one to work and he said, "Well, my coworkers want you to make us some cinnamon rolls." And so when I finish this podcast, I made my dough earlier. So when I finish, I'm going to go make him some cinnamon rolls to take to work tomorrow to share with his coworkers. So I truly enjoy spending time with my family. I truly enjoy doing mom things. I really, actually, truly enjoy what I do in education. I really enjoy interacting and helping others find their aha moment and find the joy in being an educator, because there are so many things that we could find wrong with education, but if we find that joy, that's what helps us show up every day. And so I truly do enjoy being an educator and helping other educators find the joy in working with young people each and every day.
What is your number one advice to give an educator, or really anyone, to just live, fully and really joyfully every single day?
So, the one piece of advice that I always give when anyone asks is to remain flexible. Education changes so often. There'll be a mandate today and then they'll abandon it tomorrow. Then there's a new mandate the next day. And so, one of the pieces of advice that I always give, especially my new educators entering the field, is remain flexible because if not, you're going to stress yourself out because things change so often in education that if we're not flexible, we will become frustrated ourselves with the entire profession. And so I just say remain flexible so you can continue to find the joy in what we do and the purpose of education.
In your book, you really mention also how important consistency is. How did you come about consistency, and how do you really implement it in your life in general?
So I live by a calendar, number one. So uh, I have to schedule my day so I can know what goes on. But um, I go back to that classroom management class. Not only did the facilitator talk about structure, did he talk about procedure, did he talk about routines? He talked about the importance of remaining consistent even when things are difficult. Because sometimes when we implement something, initially it may not go the way we want it to go. And so we'll have a tendency to give up and just abandon it altogether versus just consistently going through the process and allowing it to take shape. And I have realized that some things, even, I need to lose a few pounds, but it's not going to happen unless I'm consistently eating what I'm supposed to be eating and exercising, moving my body like I'm supposed to move. So I take it back to my early years in education and attending that classroom management course and recognizing that I have to remain consistent even when it was hard in order for things to truly take shape and to, for it to really just kind of take shape the way I want it to.
What do you consider your biggest success in your life that you really felt like, wow, that's really something I'm truly proud of? It can be beyond education, it's really personal. What is something that you really look after and say, wow, that really is something I'm proud of?
Well, right now it's the book. Um, I have to be honest, because it was always a desire of my heart for to be able to write a book that really spoke to educators, that really got to the heart of how I felt about education and about being in front of students each and every day. So right now it is the book. I smile. It's if you can see it in the background. So every time I look at it, I smile because I recognize that it's more than just research because it is backed by research. The practices are backed by research, but truly, it is a testament to how I was successful as a teacher. What I did each and every day to ensure that not only was I successful, but the kids in front of me, because we impact lives, and as teachers, we have the power to either kill our students' dreams by the way we treat them or by giving our students' dreams life. And so I am super just grateful. I God knew the desires of my heart, and it is just something that I'm truly proud of that I was able to get, my heart out on those pages to educators all over.
Yeah, I love the fact that you're so honest, and that also speaks really for your authenticity, right? And it's huge, right? I mean, it must have been so messy writing a book. So just walk us a little bit through, what were some of the biggest challenges that you faced?
Well, because it is with a company who is very big on ensuring that anything we put out in the atmosphere is backed by research, it was making sure that I had the research to back up the things that I was putting in the book. And so it's pages of research, reading other work, ensuring that I was true to myself and my voice. And so, when anyone reads my book, one of the biggest compliments I got from one of my colleagues is she said, Erica, I was reading your book and I felt like I was reading your diary. She was like, I could really hear you reading, hear you as I was reading the book because the every chapter begins with a story. And so I begin every chapter with a personal story from my career and how it lends itself to the topic or the theme of the chapter. And so what that really said to me was it was really true to you because I could hear your voice on these pages as I was reading. And so it was making sure that I stayed true to who I was as a person and even as an author when I wrote The Trusted Teacher.
You also mentioned, and this is something that is actually really hard, even in education, even though we think like we are all, really working for basically the common good. It's not always like this. Educators, teachers are not always, as easy, I guess, that people might think, to handle, and that they may always work nicely together. And you also really talk about, like, in depth in your last chapter about the importance of teamwork and really how it also translates really and how it really affects students. So elaborate on that.
So, a lot of times, we're in our classroom. So we're in our classroom, and sometimes it might feel like we're in a silo. But in all actuality, when we work together as a team, our students even perform better. Collective teacher efficacy really supports students' academic achievement. One of my favorite teammates, she and I actually went to two schools together with the same principal. And this principal put us on the team she kept us together on the same team because we worked really well. And because we worked really well, there was consistency across our team with our students. So our students knew that they couldn't misbehave one place and act and behave in one classroom. They knew that our expectations were the same and that our consequences aligned with each other. And because of that, our students recognized that they couldn't get over one teammate or the other, that they were held to high expectations in both, for both teammates. And so when we don't work together, there's chaos, and our students take advantage of chaos, and they take advantage of under recognizing that their teachers are not working as a collective team. And so when our students find that weakest link, they will take advantage of that. And so, but it also makes me feel good. I loved coming to work to see my teammate. We ate lunch together, we talked together, we said it, our faculty meetings together because she became a friend. And so not only do our students need to feel a sense of belonging inside of the classroom, as educators, we need to feel a sense of belonging inside of our schools. We need to feel as if we are seen, we are heard, and we are valued to our colleagues as well. So that working together as a team is just as important as cultivating that student teacher relationship.
If there is only one thing people can ever remember about you, what will it be?
One thing, uh, let me see. One thing. I really believe in the power of relationship. I believe that relationships is really what fuels us and makes the world go round. So if there's one thing is Erica Battle loves relationships and she loves to see the good in those around her.
Have you always been that positive, or what did you do to really turn this around to become such a positive force in the world?
That's actually always been my outlook. So I always see the glass half full versus half empty. I always see a so if there's a problem, I'm always looking for the solution versus staying in the problem. And so that's always been my outlook on life. So
To whom do you attribute this? Because this is a very powerful attitude, a powerful future that you really have. Who is responsible for that?
uh, my mom has always been, my mom is very sweet and she loves to ensure that the people around her are seen. She loves to make sure that, if you don't have a friend, she's going to be that friend. And so my mom is a very positive person.
Beautiful. And I also actually shout out to you for being a mom of three boys. I mean, it's huge. And to me, I think that's always it's the biggest. To me, really, parents are really the heroes of today. I think in general, it's just huge. So, what do you think was it that you always wanted to be a mom as well?
You I mean, my mom was a great mom, and so I knew that I was going to have children. I didn't, it wasn't until I had my first son that I realized, okay, I want all boys. So God granted that desire of my heart as well and gave me all boys. And I just enjoyed being a mom. I enjoyed going to the football games and going to the school plays and, helping my boys with projects and them learning to drive and all of those things. And so, that really, honestly, I think being a mom also really played a role into how I engage with my students because, you know, I say your classroom instruction and how you treat your students should be good enough for your own child, right? I never wanted to treat someone else's child in a way that I wouldn't treat my own child. And I think that's so important. I think sometimes we forget that, we want our kids teachers to treat them in a way where our kids feel valued, where we have to also do the same to other people's children as well.
Erica, what makes you truly feel alive?
You know what? The work that I do, my kids have, gotten through school. And so right now I am full swing into working with schools and educators. And honestly, I get a rush helping educators get to their aha moment, get to their success and feeling successful. So right now, that's really what's making me feel alive is truly seeing the principles of the trusted teacher in action and realizing that I played a major role in helping teachers really find a path to success in education.
What and how does to you really personal? I think you just said it, but let's define for us and for our really listeners about success. What is for you true success? give us a definition, because I think that we might have really gained some incredible insight the way you actually describe success.
You know what? And it is different for everyone. Success is different for everyone. You know, my book has done pretty well so far. And so success for me would be to see the principles and the practices that I have created live year after year, and people still appreciate those things that I created a while, some years ago. And so for me, success is truly creating something that contributes to the field of education for years to come.
So now I want to tell anyone who is listening to Erica Battle, the author of The Trusted Educator, published by Solution Tree in 2021, to really go on solutiontree.com and order a book copy of Erica Battle's book, The Trusted Educator. What a gift, Erica. Thank you so much for being on the show and for being truly a gift to myself and really the world.
Thank you so much for having me.
Erica Battle. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.d-ykm.com. Meant to make you grow.